Dr. Evil
Good morning.
from the
You're probably
jungle.
wondering why I called you all here.
Yes, $1 billion. But you know what? Let's not waste time. I'm already just stoked for today.
Do it.
A name popped onto my reading list during the darkest year of my life, 2022, when I kept on bitching about how fucked up my life was. One of my friends said, "Have you ever worked with your black book?" So what are you talking about? I said, "Dude, if you haven't read this guy, you're missing out. This is the bleeding edge of magic today." And getting my hands on the book Weaving Fate, Hypersigils Changing the Past and Telling True Lies, helped me not just help myself reinvent my life and rewrite my story, but even help others who were stuck in a story of their own. So without further ado, I'm honored to have the author of The Changeling, Weaving Fate, and 6 Ways, Aidan Wachter. Hello, Aidan!
Howdy, good morning.
Good morning.
Or good evening, good night for you.
Yeah, late night for me, but welcome to magic.tv, sir. Thank you for finally making time to be on the show with us. It means so much to me. So we want to know, Aidan, what's the story? I mean, where did it all begin? How did it start? Because your book, Weaving Fate, dude, man, thank you. I told you a side story. I didn't really want to say it on camera, but this not just affected me, it's affected somebody close to me. And when people are really blocked and can't get out of a certain chapter of their life, I say, you got to go back to your black book. And that's thanks to you. So when did it all start, Aidan?
You know, I have like to me now, retrospectively, somewhat hilariously, traditional witchcraft entrance into all this stuff. That as a child, I had night terrors and sleep paralysis and some very interesting visions that I didn't put anything in. And then I had a dream encounter with the Man in Black, or the Dark Man, as he's known more in Ireland and the Isles. And that just changed everything. I didn't know what it was at the time. I had no context for it at all. And it wasn't until I actually moved. I'd already been looking at magic and practicing for quite a while before I got into looking at witch trial testimonies and went, oh, that happened to me when I was a kid. And this explained to me kind of how that happened. So it was straight up spirit visitation.
So you basically felt like the unseen world kind of kicked you into this occult world, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also did an interesting thing that it kind of shut off. It was like it was more than like a chapter end. It was like a book closed and a new book opened. I have very few and very kind of hollow memories from before that event. It's as if I'm a different person.
So when you started, Aidan, what was your initial inspirations of getting into occultism, magic? Was there a particular author, a particular book that kind of put you on the path? Or were you just kind of like me, who started with the time, life, mysteries of the unknown?
No, it came through a combination of rock and roll and science fiction and fantasy. I discovered, I was given a calendar that was Rodney Matthews, who's well known for his illustrations for Nazareth and some other stuff. He did the cover for No Mean City. And it was all illustrations from Michael Moorcock books. And so that turned me on to Moorcock. I was about to turn 11. And I ended up finding this store called Dark Carnival in Berkeley that had all of the cool science fiction that you couldn't get where I lived. And started reading that. And that's what actually triggered this experience with the Dark Man. It happened in that dream in Dark Carnival. That's where the initial contact was. And that got me into looking at different stuff. And I ended up, so that would have been 78. In 79, I think, I picked up The Spiral Dance by Starhawk and Book 4 by Crowley. So I was 12, a little early for both of them. And that kind of kept me looking, but I didn't start practicing until I was 15, when I was introduced to this band, Psychic Television, and reached out to them and got their kind of manual for how they did what they called sigil magic, which is unlike what we tend to think of sigil magic is now. And I started practicing that. And it just worked. I mean, it was pretty straight up, and I just got more and more serious. I had some really severe possession experiences in my teens, and I guess up to about 22, and I really got kind of hardcore as a method of learning how to control those.
You mentioned something called the Dark Man. For our people who don't know who or what that is, can you kind of describe that to us so we can understand the context of where you were coming from?
Yeah, so my experience with the Dark Man is that, again, I'm a child, I'm 11. And in my dream, I'm sitting on the floor in this bookstore, Dark Carnival, looking through books, as I tended to whenever I could get my mom to drop me off there for a couple hours. And in the dream, I'm like looking at books that are in my hands, and I feel this presence in front of me. And I look up, and it is a figure of a man, head to toe in black. There's no color anywhere on his clothes that isn't black, with black hair, kind of not slicked back, kind of like, pompadour style, but kind of old world. Dark black, full beard, and eyes that were all pupil, no whites, no irises. And he just kind of blasted me with this cold. And it was horrifying. And I woke up and knew that it was not a normal dream, that it was in some way real. And so I never have forgotten that. And if we look, as I said, I didn't know what it was at the time. I was like, that was fucking horrifying, and something real happened, but my interests changed. If we look at the kind of folklore around that, and I would strongly suggest people who are interested in this pick up my friend Dara Mason's book, Song of the Dark Man. You can pre-order it now. It'll be out, I think it's the 8th or the 15th in the US and a little bit later in the UK. Really great book, looking at all this mythology and then real world modern experiences with this stuff. Unfortunately, I was incommunicado when he was writing it, so my story isn't in there. But so the Dark Man functions as kind of there's a distinction in witchcraft that is often missed when we're talking traditional witchcraft, which is this figure the devil? And the answer is yes. And that doesn't mean Satan. That this is a different character. It's a different kind of spirit. And it's important to understand that a whole lot of spirits were spoken of as devils at that time. That they didn't become the same thing in people's minds till much later. And it's this figure that recurs in the folklore and then in the witch trials of this dark figure, sometimes that has, goat features, goat hooves, animal features, shapeshifter, who basically shows up and kind of produces initiation in these witches. It's there's a great talk that just came out, I think, with between Dara and Douglas at What Magic Is This, where Doug is like, what how do you suggest to Dara you get in contact? And Dara's thing is like, I don't really suggest that, which is kind of my take on it too. It's not a controllable experience, and it's not necessarily a desirable experience. So it's not really to be chased after, I don't think. But for people that it happens to, I think it is what it is. It's just, it kind of ties into a lot of my other thoughts about kind of the differences in how magic is perceived in the modern world and how magic actually is, which is that there's a lot less control, and that it's maybe not about that, that it's, we reach out to things and we like to have that sense that it's always us reaching out, but I believe it works the other way as much or more prevalently.
Wade and I agree, right, Wade?
I actually had a very similar experience when I was it was one of the first formative experiences that I remember about that, except he wasn't in black. It was all red and gold and stripy. I don't know if you've ever seen any Tibetan demons.
Yeah.
It is very similar image to that, but he showed in a tree in my backyard. And I remember being so excited the next day, I went out to climb up the tree just to see if he was still there.
Yeah, these things are. It's that shift. If I think about it, that's the root of kind of why my approach is so animistic. Is that, and I had a great chat with somebody who's working on a film that I knew some of my experiences could be helpful for them to have knowledge of. And I went through kind of these multiple kind of possession experiences and a couple of intense demonic intrusions that crossed over into lots of other people's lives. That wasn't UPG, as it gets slurred so much now, at all. It's like, no, this affected a bunch of people who had no idea what I was going through. These were independent things. And at the end of that conversation, she was like, oh, I get you now. Like, you are way beyond faith here. Like, you have actual knowledge that this is real. It's like almost everybody is running on faith that she knows. And she's like, I get it now. Like, that's why you can be so concrete about this and so open about it, is because, no, it's tangible. I've touched it, and it's touched me in very big ways. And it's not controllable.
That's amazing, because it's like, we'll talk about it after the show, but I was just basically mentioning something very similar to this to Wade right before you jumped on. I just told him something like that. And for those who feel that they have been communicated with something that is akin to or similar to the dark man, what can be your suggestions to them? It's like, if you think that you're one of those people that are kind of getting that tap on the shoulder, what you just go with it, avoid it, do what needs to be done and be gone with it? Like, what's your take on that?
I would say do your research, but don't be swayed by your research. Don't believe it, because what happens to me in that in moment, what happens to anybody else in that moment, isn't necessarily what's happening for you. These things want different things. They have different desires for different people. Know that it's common. It's not uncommon. It's just that it's, probably if I have like the hot take that is super sketchy in the modern world is, a lot of these kinds of things are really viewed as psychosis now. And given that the model, this kind of materialist, and I'm going to say scientism-based model, not actual science, because we would end up in a different place if it was actual science, does not have space for this. And that's, that was intentional. That's the function of most major religions, is how do we divorce people from these connections? Because people aren't controllable if they have them. If they have a literal connection to real power, they don't care what you think they should be doing. They're very hard to control. So look into it, see what you can find out, but don't take anybody else's story about it particularly serious. You don't have to enter into any agreements ever. I don't generally recommend that. And you get to choose them if you do. A lot of things will show up and say it's got to be this way, and I'm now your main girl, or whatever. Period. You don't have to go there. It's kind of, I think that there's like habitual patterns of working with these things, and they fall into them as much as we do. And realize that you may not ever actually know why what happened. And it could be a one-off. It could go on for a couple of years. It could recur. For me, I didn't see that figure so that would have been 78, and I saw it again in 2000.
Whoa.
So 12-year gap. It was not available to contact, and it showed up and told me something and gone again.
Wow. All right, I have a question. Did that dark man have anything to do with the creation of this wonderful book, Weaving Fate? Or was that something separate? And if not, what was the major inspiration of the creation of this text? This has been worth its weight in gold.
So again, I would say, as kind of this initiatory figure that I think woke something up in me. Yeah, it's involved in everything that happened later. Because again, I do feel like I was a different person previous to that experience. But specifically, no. That one is very much tied to my relationship with the Norns. And that came about in an interesting way. It was I'd written 6 Ways. That was really a straightforward, like, let's put out the most useful kind of foundational skills that I know that I can teach, and do it in a way that's not dogmatic, that's not system based, that's not spewing a bunch of bullshit about them. That's really saying, try this, play with it, figure out how it works for you, because it's going to be different. And the idea behind 6 Ways was, most of us only need a couple of techniques that we need to get really good at. Mm-hmm. But what those are going to be different. For some, that's going to be invocation or evocation or divination or, sigil magic. Enchantment. We need a couple methods.
Yeah. And then we can a lot of people's magic is really just about affecting a person to like them or not like them, or to change their mood about something. That's the bulk of what a lot of practical magic is manipulating other people.
Right. And I have a very different perspective on that, which I think that's a great way to learn what magic is and isn't, and to learn what matters to you if you're paying attention. Like, if you're totally ego driven and you stay that way, you're not going to learn anything. But if you actually go like, ooh, I did get this person to fall for me and it fucking sucks. Like I said in 6 Ways, I think like, oh great, now I have a stalker. I wanted a great one night stand, and now I have a stalker that I have to deal with. This is a great learning experience, and it's a great tool if it's taken that way. If you immediately run to, how do I mitigate this thing so I can go try it again, you're missing the point, to me, of practical magic. That I believe that practical magic kind of teaches reality better than most things. But anyway, so 6 Ways was kind of like, if I dump 25 of these things, kind of methods, with enough information to get going, people will find 1 or 2 they can use, and then they can get really good at those and figure out what you can do with them. So Weaving Fate is the exact opposite. These are 3 things that work extremely well together. Practiced together, they produce a very I can't remember what the word is, but it's way more than the sum of their parts. Tools for synergy, yeah, to completely change your experience of reality, and in my perception, reality itself, in a way that doesn't require somebody to essentially dive into years of study before they can get going. And so that's really what Weaving Fate was about. The timing was very specific too. I was writing it pre-pandemic, and I finished it as that was, kind of coming into place. And it was really like, the world our individual worlds do not have to be the way that we generally think they have to be. This doesn't mean we have total control, because again, I'm not a big believer in control, but we do have a lot of influence, and most of that starts here. And so Weaving Fate is really, how do we get this clear so it's not fucking up this, and how do we get this clear so it's not fucking up this, so that we can actually be focused on the things that we actually want to occur in a very grand scheme of things. It's not sometimes it does freaky well on details, but it's more, how do you get the whole flow of the current moving how you want it to be, and that's where its really greatest benefit is, I think.
My biggest question about Weaving Fate is, because of course, I mean, if it's not obvious, it's like really my favorite work of yours.
Thank you.
Really. I mean, like, it's very Pokemon. You got one, you got to catch them all. But the Black Book, where did the inspiration for that come from? The technique, the method, the creation of it? Because it's so intricate. Because nowadays we're in an entire generation of victims. Everybody's a victim. They're always finding something outside of them. And what I really found empowering about the Black Book method in Weaving Fate was, if you don't like it, write your story. You know what I mean? That's what I loved about it. And it's like, it's brilliant how you work with that. But I'm curious what inspired you to doing something like that, because it's revolutionary.
Probably if I think about it, it was probably that sigil method that Topi taught initially, which was their suggestion for the sigil of three liquids, which is how you became a member of the temple, was creating these things and sending them in, which was a great kind of buffer technique, because it's something that you would never do rationally as a magician. And so you had to actually be kind of crazy to go like, yeah, I think that I can manage this on my end just fine. It was to write out your deepest sex fantasy, charge this with sexual fluids, add hair, add nail clippings, all this, right? And then I started playing with, I mentioned it I think in the book, but I had a friend that had this kind of old William Burroughs-esque typewriter in his room, and sometimes it was out and sometimes it was in its case, and I asked him one time, like, what's with the ancient typewriter? And he said, oh, if you type what you want on that one, it usually comes to pass. And so I tried this. I borrowed it and used it. It did a little bit, but not a lot. But I could tell there was something there. And I began then mailing these as letters to myself, talking about events that had happened in my life that I wished would happen. And actually stamping them, posting them, dropping them in a box. And they would come in, and then I would take these and I would put them in another box that was kind of like the box of these charged letters, but I wouldn't open them. And that worked really well. From there, I began going, wait a second, I journal all the time. What happens if I actually journal the life that I wish I was living rather than the one that I am? And that's where the Black Book came from, was that actually worked really well. And it's something that I'd done then for a long time. And a friend of mine who I had taken classes with and made a lot of jewelry for, taught a class on hyper sigils, which I'd never heard of. And as soon as he got going on it, I was like, oh, this is how I do hyper sigils. This is my version. And it's a huge thing. It does things that no other kind of magic that I've played with does. Particularly if you run the whole combo of that and the corridor and the fever stone in the book. They really are. They're a little bit like the components of gunpowder. On their own, they might do some interesting things, but when you add them together, they do something very different.
Kaboom.
They do something similar to that with the tarot, where if you have something you want to that you want to have happen, you lay out a tarot reading as if it was already predicted. Yeah, and you just lay it out on your altar and you leave it there until that happens.
Yeah, and that's one of the roots of the words for sorcerer that we get is specifically, and I talk about this in there too, because this is one of the ways that I got into using sorcery as a term. Was one of the definitions that I came across was it one who lays out lots, and I read it that way. It's like, okay, they lay them out. They don't pick them out. They're not randomly pulling cards or runes or whatever. They're actually laying them out. And then realizing that idea of lot can be the marker or the card or the rune, but it's also your fate. So it's the one who lays out fate, right? And so I did this quite a lot more with runes than tarot, because I've never been a big tarot person.
I do have a question just for posterity's sake. I mean, I kind of jumped ahead of myself when I said I love the Black Book, but I figured that I'm the only one and you who know about it. The viewers might go, what the hell's the Black Book? So would you mind giving us a brief explanation of what the Black Book technique is about, so that we could just hyper sell your book to other people?
Yeah, so the Black Book technique is basically a form of, we'll call it self-enchantment is the easiest way to accept it. Though I think it's much more than that. And what it is you literally begin what I call a false journal. You create a book, does not have to be black cover on it, but you want a blank book, something that would reasonably be a journal to you. You don't want something that, I don't go for black books to be super fancy grimoire looking things. If it's a composition book, that's fine, But you consecrate the fuck out of it. You consecrate all of the tools that you use with it. There's a whole process for that, to make it really clear to yourself and to your peeps, if you're connected in that way, that this is a potent magical tool. And the only thing that you do in it is you write about days that have happened that were in some way kick-ass, that were perfect for you. And you want to feel it as much as you possibly can, more than you want to think about it. And you kind of regularly feed this thing. And so it's not a place to talk about what you don't want to have happen, or what you don't like, or what a shitty day you had. This is exactly not what you use it for. You're really kind of allowing your mind to go, what would be a perfect day? What would be a perfect future? What would be a perfect life? What would be a perfect state for me to be in more of the time? And try and tap into that. And you write the entries from that point. And it tends to be very transformative for people.
And this does not necessarily have to be something that has actually happened. Am I correct? Like you can say,
oh no, it's no. This is you're making it up, yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't like, oh well, I dated 16 supermodels today. It's like, well, that hasn't happened, but wouldn't it be nice, right?
Yeah, and you're welcome to throw that in there. And the key into it is figuring out, and it's one of the things that it helps with, is figuring out what are the needs behind the wants. And it's very good at exposing that over time, because there's a certain point where maybe that's what you're writing is, I've dated all these supermodels, it's great, my life is just fuck city, right? At some point you go, I don't buy it, this isn't actually that, and you realize there's some kind of connection that you're looking for that you're not getting, and it begins to open up that as a possibility. You go, okay, well, what's that? How do I think about that? What does that feel like? What is this thing that I'm missing? Is it the supermodel that matters? Is it fuck city that matters? Is it something else? And it begins to expose that stuff, and it begins to shift circumstances in that direction. It is certainly, it's weird the degree that it actually will sometimes spit out specifics. But a lot of that is based on how, it's kind of a weird combo. It's like, how realistic are you being about things that could happen versus raw kind of over the top fantasies, realizing there's a place for both, but can you begin to break down those over the top fantasies into things that you could kind of accept? Like maybe it's you discover you're more attractive to the opposite sex as stage one. You don't try and jump that. And you begin going, what would that be like if you walked into the cafe and the barista you like began responding to you differently? What would it be like if that began to happen more frequently? Is this a good thing? Because then it gives you space to play. Is this actually the thing you want? Because this could be fucking annoying. You know, you can ask any really beautiful woman that you know how annoying it is, and they will tell you. And so yeah, it's not about you can go grandiose, but that's not where the best value is. The best value is what can you really kind of buy into a little bit. You don't see the path to it, but you go, I could see that somehow my life could be better in this way, or it could be more like this, or I could be more like this.
I'm glad I have this opportunity to ask you this live on the air, because with the Black Book technique, you're dealing with a lot of raw emotional energy. But for people who have experienced traumatic things, death of a loved one, PTSD, rape, survivors, I mean, very heinous things, their energy outputs end up becoming very extreme, but contrary to what it should be. So for example, a rape survivor, they would have trouble trusting people, or trusting people with intimacy. So when you want to write something, well, I have somebody here that I can trust, but by thinking of that, you're triggering this wound, this PTSD aspect of the person. Is the Black Book technique something you would recommend for people with heavy traumatic experience, or would you say you need to resolve these traumas first so that you're feeding the book with the right kind of energy?
Yes and no. And this is, again, we got to throw out there that, as far as I know, none of us are psych professionals or medical professionals. And so I'm coming at this as a sorcerer, not as somebody who can prescribe anything.
Yeah.
The Black Book itself isn't the part of Weaving Fate that kind of looks at that stuff. That's where you're really looking into the Fever Stone and the corridor work. And the root issue that I have found really, I touched on it in that book. I had an inkling of it, but I've learned a lot more now, is realizing that trauma and understanding that trauma is about the experience. It's not about the event. So what traumatized me is not what would necessarily traumatize you, Rob, or you, Wade. You could go like, whatever, no effect, right? It's about the experience and what happens on us. And what's now kind of coming to be better known is that trauma response locks kind of patterning into the body. And it is very, very difficult to undo those patterns with the mind. So this is where we see a lot of somatic-based therapies now coming into the fore, and polyvagal theory coming more into the fore, because they actually understand that this isn't a top-down issue, it's a bottom-up issue. Your body is having a response now. It's learned something, and it's patterned in there, and it's stuck. So that idea of triggering in the not bullshit way, because there's a lot of bullshit use of that term, but in the real sense of that is a physical response that we then are doing what the mind likes to do, which is rationalize and justify and say, this is this, but you can't take it apart up here. So you need a method to get into the body. And the Fever Stone is a method that I was taught by some of my allies that begins this process. For some people, it will be enough, but for a lot, I would strongly suggest that they kind of hunt down somatic-based therapies, which are really body-based and really people who've got great skill at undoing kind of that tangle, because it's a neurological tangle more than it is a psychological issue. But the Fever Stone is a good start. Reiki? I'm sorry?
Have you ever done any Reiki?
I actually have had all 3 attunements done. But when I experimented with it as actually a practitioner, my allies don't like it, which is a kind of a common issue that I have with my allies, is there's a lot that they don't like, and so I have to kind of run with what they've got.
Well, it's funny you mentioned tangle, because sometimes if I'm working on somebody, I'll find like just a giant hairball, and as you're kind of combing that out, they start talking about things that have happened, like, oh yeah, I suddenly, like, I'll like feel a bruise across their back, and I'll be like, what was this? And they're like, oh yeah, my old man that lived next door to us hit me with a stick one time when he caught me in his garden, and I didn't realize how much that had bothered me as a child. But things like that when you untangle that, it releases all of that.
Yeah, and that's very much the case. I mean, most massage therapists and most body workers will discover this at some point. I think it's now taught that a lot of the time when you're doing that kind of work on people, it will release some of this stuff. And so all of these kind of, I didn't know that I don't know anyone currently who practices Reiki, but it's very common. I work with a body-based therapist myself, and these kind of things happen all the time, where we'll be doing something that's just like, let's just play in the throat center or something, and she'll help me get in there, and it's like ping, ping, ping. The allies pop up for me. She's very good. She's like, understands when it happens and is aware of it when it happens. And I'll be able to go like, oh, this, and this combined to this kind of knot or tangle. And through that process of releasing it in the body, it just falls away, which is kind of the crazy thing. And I don't know if you've had that experience with your clients. Is that something that you've seen where it's kind of done in a way? It's not like they then need to go take this to their talk therapist. It's often right. It just falls away.
Because once it's out, everything can kind of flow through, and it's like, that's something that happened. It's like, oh yeah, it's 66 degrees outside, partly sunny, and an old man hit me with a stick. It doesn't have the emotional baggage on it anymore. You just get closure on it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like unplugging the pipes, or in other words, it's like allowing it to flow so it doesn't cause that congestion energetically anymore.
Right,
Exactly.
and so the brothers, when they taught the Fever Stone, and the brothers present to me as Neanderthal hunters, um, and their description was very much tied to that world, which they were saying basically like events happen, and some of them are fine. Doesn't matter how bad it is. You know, your arm gets broken, you get stabbed by a, you know, you get cut by a boar or something, and you just heal up and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've got some scarring, but there's no big deal. Some things happen and it doesn't make any real sense, but you end up with almost like an infection, is how they talked about it, which produces what they call the Fever Stone. And so, you know, weaving fate, that Fever Stone process is how do you go, is a way of going in and basically extracting those and doing an alchemical transformation of them to free up all that energy. And for me, I think it was the thing that then led me to where I got to now with, you know, when I started working with this body-based therapist, she was like, whoa, this shit's like all just ready to go. And so I don't think it did all of it. And so I wouldn't put it forward as a solution, but I think it's definitely helps begin to break up those patterns. And has done very good work for a lot of folks that I know.
Amazing. So anyhow, for those of you just tuning in, we are with the author of Six Ways, and for Six Ways itself, have it here, Aidan Wachter. And now we're going to go to the next aspect of our show, which is the current event segment. Now, you've given a lot of cutting edge stuff. Like literally, your name popped up out of nowhere in 2021 before my life turned to crap in 2022. It was your name and it was Jack Grail. So I'm thankful for both of you. Things I've learned from the two of you has really helped me get through the worst parts of my life. So with the current event segment, I'd like to know, Aidan, how do you feel these practices are, how do I say, gestating in the world right now? I mean, are more and more people going to be writing their black books, or do you think that this is like the last hurrah, that we have to save the generation before it's too late? I'd love to hear your take on the current events of your practices and of your beliefs, and even the state of magic as a whole in the world. What do you think, sir?
So I only know a tiny little corner of things. I'm not generally looking super wide anymore. What I see is that there are a lot of folks who are getting very aware of all of this stuff, and the stuff that is to me relevant, which is kind of the prevalence of neurodivergence, the prevalence of this kind of body trauma response. And there's more folks that are looking at how do we integrate these things to try and bring about both personal and wider healing. Because functionally, if I look at the world, you go, this is, you know, we're in a complete clusterfuck that is based on people who have deep, often intergenerational trauma, desperately trying not to do the work. They are doing everything possible to point the finger somewhere else, in a very common belief that if we can get rid of the people that don't think like I do, then everything will be great. And it's like, no, you're just really damaged. As most of us are to some degree, you know, it's not the same for everybody. I think that if we can kind of seed out and continue to put out good information and usable information, and kind of counter the tide of kind of crap, because there's a lot of crap in the magic world as well as other stuff. I have incredible faith in the youngest people right now. I see more incredible shit happening there. And part of it is because I think they actually grew up not buying any of this shit. Like I was very first wave of that in my family. Like early on, I went, something's wrong. What's up? And over time, I kind of went, the people who are in charge have no business being in charge and do not have anything like my best interest or the best interest of the general pop in mind, even, let alone kind of in their kind of core. And I think I see a huge move in the young people as that is a starting place. And now they have to kind of, if there's kind of a trick for them or an issue for them, is like, cool, so what do you do different? You guys are going to have to figure it out, because my generation ain't gonna do it. And that's on the wider level. Magic, I think, is magic cycles in this kind of more modern period. I'm a firm believer that it's innate in the animal. Definitely some folks get hit with it a lot harder. And that's a positive and negative. You may not want that, and you may have it, and that could be really shitty. I'm comfortable with it, so it's good for me. But the fact that there's for all of the haters and all of the people that really want to be authorities and piss on everybody that doesn't know what they know, there's a ton of people who are just doing the work, which is what actually matters to me, because I believe we're trying to figure out how are we well as a species, and magic to me is a very big part of that. I believe that in many ways modern civilization has consistently been anti-magic from at least Roman times, and I don't think it's got us anywhere good. So I think kind of the shift towards that, though it freaks a lot of people out as being superstitious woo, I think it's a very good thing, because I think it's moving us closer to what reality actually is, not the overlay that we've put on it.
Yeah, society absolutely requires everybody to be stable and on the same page and working together like the gears in a clock. So if you have someone who's got abilities that are unpredictable or take them out of that particular role that society thinks they should be in, yeah, that's a threat to society until they start to accept the fact that these people can be of greater use if you find their proper place in society. Mm-hmm. And we're not ready yet. Humans still struggle with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often talk about my view of animism as being biological, in that I view that the field, which is kind of the whole of everything that is and everything that could be, is this vast organism that we are parts of. And so it would be really weird to me if, as magicians, I and Wade and you, Rob, all had the same function within the system, right? Mm-hmm. It's like you don't need everything to do the same thing. Otherwise, you don't have humans, you have a big fingernail, right? Because all the cells just decide to form and be a fingernail. And mm-hmm. that's kind of what kind of civilization and societies push towards. It's like we want everybody to just be, pinky fingers, because we want to control the opposable thumb and the usable fingers, right? But it doesn't help anybody in the end. In the short term, sure, you go great. You have a bunch of people who aren't threats, who aren't useful, who you've denied them the opportunity to be useful, and you're trying to kind of. I talk about it as a binary, but it's actually kind of almost worse than a binary. It's this idea that this is good, this is bad. You are good, I am bad, right? That's your binary. But then within that, what we've come up with is they realized people chafe against that. Mm-hmm. And so instead, we're going to go, here are 10 things you could be. Anything else than that, you're a fucking pariah. Mm-hmm. And this is worse because it makes it less obvious. Because people go, oh, I can't do any of these 10 things. You go, well, fuck it. There's a billion things you could be. There's a billion ways you could be. And this is correct. We are clearly not designed as a uniform species. We just aren't.
Well, even if you go back to the metaphor of the clock, when you take a clock apart, you look, there's some round gears with big teeth, there's some small with little teeth, there's the little, I don't know what it's called, little thing that just wiggles back and forth, there's hands. It's a whole different thing, but everything works together once you have it in the right place, moving the right way.
Right.
And a lot of people just aren't in the right spot.
A lot of people aren't in the right spot, and people who are in the right spot for them but are not being useful or are viewed mm-hmm. as being in the way the best way to manage that is to make them pariahs, make them insane, make them other in a really vicious, violent way. And so this is kind of, it's why I stay out of so many of the arguments and have for a very long time on the magical end, because it's like, I don't care what anyone else does. I assume they have reasons. I assume that hopefully they're figuring out what those reasons really are and what their function in the system is. And to me, that's kind of that, again, it's, I believe we have an important function in the system as magical practitioners. And part of that is simply carrying these currents forward. We've managed to do it so far through this whole kind of shift away from this kind of worldview and these kind of practices. And I think it's important that we just continue because it's going to become more important to the day-to-day functioning of this place at some point, because we're not going to be well until this is integrated along with everything else.
I agree with you 100% on that, Aidan. But there's also another, as a magical educator myself, I've been doing it for like 10 years here in the Philippines, if not longer. There is, yes, we have to integrate it into our cultures and make it part of our worldgeist. But there's also a problem where there are people who are dictating how to do it as right or wrong, when they should be inclusive on all people's approach to it. Like here in the Philippines for the past couple of years, I've spoken to Wade about this and a lot of my students. We had a very bad case of bright worker syndrome, not light worker syndrome, bright worker, which is a true light worker will not judge anyone. You know, it's like, I choose to be a light worker. I accept, I love everybody for what they are. They're pieces in the clock. Everybody has their role. A bright worker, on the other hand, would be the kind of individual who would go to everybody that does not agree with them and saying, you're wrong. If you don't do it our way, you're wrong. And this got into modern culture that the wrong people were dictating to the society that, wait, your approach is wrong. So you had people coming to me saying that, Rob, I don't feel comfortable because I am not a light worker. Is there something wrong with me? And I'm like, of course not. You are what you are. The problem was inclusivity was not added to the equation. And I think at the end of the day, especially with magic, a person's personal authenticity is very paramount in figuring out their role in the world. You cannot ask, for example, a fish to climb a tree. It's just ludicrous. But if you ask it to swim, it'll do its job perfectly. And that's one of the things that's plaguing this country, probably parts of the world, because people are being told to be something that they're not. We should just celebrate individuals for what they are, and through that, unleash the truest form of magic. Is that something you agree with?
I absolutely do. You know, I've talked about it a lot, saying, you know, like, again, if I'm a cell in the body and my function is like, you know, to be a happy retina cell, what I do is not going to make sense to those really critical, you know, cancer killing cells. Like, they're like, why the fuck are you doing that? We have something important to do, right? They don't do that in a normal system. They go, oh, yeah, this helps you keep us alive because you can see and move around, you know, without knocking into things, and you can do things that we can't. And so I talk about this a lot. Like, I don't suggest to the people who come to my work and who gel with it that they get heavily involved in curse work or hexing, because it's kind of counter to the current that I'm in. This is not to say I haven't done it. It's not to say I wouldn't do it. But it's way down the road for me. It's not an easy thing because it doesn't run. It's not running in the current that I'm in. Do I have an issue that people choose to do this politically or shit like that? No. Do I think it's wise to do it pettily? No. I think it's really stupid. I think that, you know, I use that example frequently because it's the one that people get. It's like, do you hang out with the people that every time they go out to the bar start fights? No. I don't hang out with the magicians that do it either. I also do not want to ever tell anybody what the fuck to do. If somebody comes to me and says, I'm having X problem or X issue, how do you think I should approach it? I'm going to tell them, if it was me, I would do this. And here's why. Because then they have the tools to decide, does this make sense? Is his reasoning meshing with mine? Is his experience meshing with mine? And then we can play from beyond that, and we can move into, well, let's see if we can come up with something that would work for you, that makes sense to you. And so, yeah, I think that there's too much, again, there's too much desire to control everywhere. And it like leaches out of the mainstream into subcultures always. It's just kind of part of the beast. And the sooner you can kind of, in my opinion, the sooner you can kind of extricate yourself from that and go, not my issue. My issue is what can I, my peeps, and my people achieve that makes this a better place for us and hopefully everybody else.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to be going to the last part of the show, which is the occult text segment. And for those of you who don't know, the occult text is where the guest, the master, the teacher, the author teaches us something from their own personal book of goodies. It's completely up to the guest we have to teach us whatever they want. They can teach us a spell, ritual, working, meditation, whatever, or they can even do something from completely left field, like teach us how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Our fingers are crossed right now with Aidan because we'd love to learn something amazing from him right now at this segment of Occult Text. So what have you got for us, Aidan?
I didn't know until now. Let's see. So this is just one of those things that I think used to be common knowledge. And it isn't. And so I'm going to read a piece. That might be a problem. We have attribution issues here. So let me go somewhere else. We won't use that exact example. How should we do this? So we can do it in a general way. So we have, understand that this is not the ceremonial magic approach to these terms, or the religious approach to these terms, but we're going to use them because they're, in my mind, the most accurate. So there's two operations of dealing with what we perceive as external spirits or archetypes, if you like that, are more comfortable with that. I don't care. And one is the practice of evocation, where we're conjuring spirits up in front of us, essentially, or in some way we can operate with. And we're addressing them, and we're either trying to learn from them, or we're asking them to do something for us, right? This is a lot of traditional Grimoire magic is evocation-based. The other side of that is invocation. And invocation, because it gets tied into a lot of religious practices, and where I think the term is not used correctly to me, is where we actually try to bring these energies into our own system, and we try and become that thing. I always use the reference from Hawkwind, who I loved as a child, of their song Master of the Universe, which is kind of a brilliant solar invocation in a way that says, you know, I am the master of the universe. Winds of time are flowing through me, and it's all moving relative to me. It's all a figment of my mind in a world that I've designed. This is an invocation. He's taking on these powers. He's saying, these are mine. I am this. Invocation in this way is very beautiful because it's transformative. It's not, you're right, if we think about classical demonology, where we're evoking a spirit into a safe space. We are protected by our circle. We're evoking them into a triangle. Everything's contained. Invocation, in this sense, goes very counter to that and ties into something that happens much more frequently in, you know, ATRs and shamanic societies, where we go, no, I actually would like some of this power, some of these attributes to become part of me, at least for the moment. And so what this is whatever energies, and you can do this with runes, you can do it with tarot cards, you can do it with any archetypes, you can do it with a lot of spirits. Be aware that if you do it with spirits, you want to be cool with that spirit hanging out with you longer than you might think it might. But you can actually operate as that spirit during that time period. I will share a little bit of this. So this is from a book called The New Aradia that Laura Tempest Zakroff put together and I wrote a piece for, which is an invocation of Aradia. Yeah, we're going to read it. For those who don't know, Aradia is a really interesting witchcraft book because it's probably to the outsider, if we're looking at older folklore, it's probably the scariest document because it has very little to do with good behavior. It's extremely anarchistic. It's extremely anti-institutional power. It is really put forward as a direct attack on the 1% of its time. And so this was really how I put this together is relevant, and that's kind of, it ties into this whole process of invocation in this sense. Is I actually have read this book many times over the decades, and it describes all of these characteristics of Aradia. It tells us how she came to be, that Lucifer the sun and Diana the moon. Diana was in love with her brother, who was the sun, and wanted to get it on. And Lucifer was like, no. So she eventually decided that she would turn herself into a cat and see if she could seduce Lucifer in the form of a cat, which she does. Their child is Aradia, and Aradia is eventually sent down to Earth to basically protect however we want to view it, the witches of the time. And this is Italian folklore that is very questionable. There's big arguments about whether the guy who translated this got it right. There's not much source material to back it up. But anyway, Charles Godfrey Leland wrote the original book. And so there's pieces that when you hear them, understand that they're all connected to the spirit as the book describes it. Because I was trying to connect this into this piece of work that these folks did. Was let's really get the spirit of the book into this book that is theoretically connected to her. So I'll read it to you, and then we can look at how it works. Io Aradia, daughter of Lucifer, cat-born, firefly, child of the light. Io Aradia, daughter of Diana, cat-born, firefly, child of the night. Bring you the poison, beautiful sister, salt on the table for tyrants and kings. Bring you the harvest, beautiful mother, a spell of great bounty, the downfall of lords. Bring me my lover, witch queen, witch mother, dog-ridden and wanting, close by my side. Bless me thee my tongue with the language of spirits, so I may command them to find what I seek. Bless thee my ears with the language of nature, that I may know the words of the wind. My hands are your hands, blessed enchantress. The works that they do are your work alone. My voice is your voice, blessed enchantress. The words that you speak are the will of the world. Io Aradia, daughter of Lucifer, cat-born, firefly, child of the light. Io Aradia, daughter of Diana, cat-born, firefly, child of the night. Aradia, Diana, Rorasa. Aradia, Diana, Rorasa. Aradia, Diana, Rorasa. In this pattern of invocatory work, as it states in the spell itself or the call itself, when you do this, what then next you do is done as that being. It's actually in you. It's not you. You have set yourself aside and you're letting it do the work. Now you can guide this to some degree. If you come in with an intention, most of the time it will go as you expect. But it's also extremely risky if you are not already connected and have a relationship with these spirits, which is kind of the critical key here. Because those things actually exist in some form, even if it is an imaginal form, even if it is an archetypal form, though in general, I think that most of these things actually have independent agentic existences. You are basically removing yourself from the process of whatever work you're doing at that stage. You're saying, this is not me, this is her. And you can do this with many other things. This is simply an example that is relevant to me because of my connection to her. This is probably the most useful tool for folks who are trying to figure out, how do I actually get to know spirits that you are comfortable having in your body, that I've found, is this technique. And again, not recommended, but if it makes sense to you, and if you have spirits that you know well enough, that you have a strong enough connection with, that you would like to bring in that next layer, it's very effective.
Wow. That's something that. And what book is that from again, if you don't mind us asking? Because I really would like to dig into it more.
The book that this is that I submitted this to is called The New Aradia, A Witch's Handbook to Magical Resistance, which is edited by Laura Tempest Zakharoff and is published by Revelor Press.
Mm-hmm.
And then the original book is called Aradia, The Gospel of the Witches by Charles Godfrey Leland. Mm-hmm. And again, know that there's a lot of folks that don't trust Leland, but I think he's created something kind of astounding regardless. So
that's amazing. And you know what? I mean, it's creepy, it's challenging, but at the same time, it's very powerful. And it's something that I would say I would think over before I'd ever attempt that. But it is something I'd like to give it a try, because I personally practice some 3rd G thanks to my learnings from Jack Grail. I have my own relationship with my patron Anubis, and I'm wondering, like, maybe if that technique could help me understand by helping me understand my connection to him, that I kind of say, okay, what's really going on here? Because it seems to me kind of like it gets my ego out of the way of what needs to be done, and I could really see, well, who's pulling the strings there? So that's a very powerful working if that's the way it's supposed to be done.
It's interesting because we can see this in different. Again, it shows up in witch trial documents, and it shows up in other systems. And part of this is it's an important thing to me in my practice, which is because I believe and know that most of these beings that I operate with have an agency in the world. Mm-hmm. That it's not. I don't really run off of archetypes as people think of them. That I believe that that's a thing, but I think that we're talking more egregore at that point. My interest is working with them. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in working them to my ends solely. I believe we can have both to some degree, and some of them will tell you, I don't give a fuck about what you want. Which is why it is important that you actually have a solid connection and you be comfortable with this. This piece came about because I was asked, would you write something for it? And I knew. It's like, oh, I know what I have to write for that. I have to bring her into the book. And I'm okay with that. And right now she's kind of woken up and said, like, get this out into the world again. And share it, because she's interested in what's happening right now. And I think that she is one of the strongest kind of defenders and supporters, as a spirit goes, in working to counter anti-magic forces.
Sounds like something the world needs right now. That's amazing. So before we go any further, we just wanted to thank you for being part of the segment. It was just mind-blowing. I mean, I'm going to order that book right now. You have any upcoming workshops, books, anything you want to plug so that we can promote you, a website so that people know where they can find you and support your work? You can share it right now, because we want to support all the authors who appear on our show.
Yeah, thank you. I am mostly off social media. I do post some pictures of mostly just the natural world on Instagram as Aidan_Wachter. And I'm almost entirely, basically all of the place that I'm active is inside my Patreon, which you can just search Patreon for Aidan Wachter, or you can find the link to that either at my Instagram or at my website, which is very outdated from when I was in hiding for a couple of years. It needs to be updated, but that's aidanwachter.com.
Amazing. So we're gonna have this uploaded on YouTube. And Aidan, it's been such an honor to learn this from you. By the way, I wanted to ask: is there going to be a book 4 of this series anytime soon, or will I be waiting some time?
You started to ask about the color, and it's a tough question. Is the next book green? I don't know. It's hard to tell. But there are 2 books that I know that are coming. One of them is in process now. Mm-hmm. And the other one is harder. And so I had to ask the peeps, like, can we do the easier one first? Because I'm not quite sure how to do the harder one yet. And they agreed, but they're also kind of squeezing the easier one into harder territory right now. So they're kind of like, you don't get off that easy. But hopefully I'll have that book done by the end of the year.
Amazing. Looking forward to hearing that. And of course, we're going to also plug that book you mentioned about the EO Aradia that you shared us about, because I'm sure a lot of people would like to dig into that more. So once again, Aidan, thank you for joining us. Please don't leave. We're going to move you to the waiting room. It was an honor. And guys, check us up on YouTube once it's available. We're with Aidan Wachter again, the author of the 3O series, 6 Ways, The Changeling, and Weaving Fate. Get his books now because they are magical gems. So thank you very much
for having me. It's a
honor
pleasure.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. We're just going to say our formal goodbyes afterwards. So, Wade, once again, it's another epic episode for the books. Wouldn't you agree, my friend?
Oh, absolutely. This was great. Great stuff.
And I'm really looking forward to dig into that technique you trained us. It kind of creeps out on what we were talking about before the show, which one day you and I will share that online. So, guys, stay tuned for our next episode, because in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be announcing who our next mystery guest is going to be. So, from magickal.tv, this is Rob from the Philippines and Wade Long signing out.